We're old men, Arthur. Let us live in our memories.
Whatever you say, Dutch.
We did it. Hosea. Huh? Whatever else happens, we did it.
I know.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Ride With Me, a podcast about the queerness of Red Dead Redemption 2. Prior to playing Red Dead Redemption 2, I was staunchly negative towards fan fiction and fan art that depicted shipping, or relationships between characters in a fandom. I know. Anyone who knows me might be surprised by this, as I am fairly obsessed with shipping Arthur Morgan and Josiah Trelawney. But I was jaded and snobby about fanships, and I am sorry, very sorry, for being dismissive towards anyone, especially my bestie Jen, who often encouraged me to read spicy Gentleman Jack fanfic. But then I fell into the world of sad cowboys and had a random sexy dream about Arthur and Trelawney. The dream was so detailed and somehow made so much sense to me that I became very inspired by it. I felt the urge to draw and to write about them being together. Hell, the ship led me to creating this podcast. In the beginning of my fascination with the ship, otherwise known as Morlani, I went to the internet to seek out answers as to why I suddenly was so into it. I was worried that I was fetishizing queer men. Basic searches on Reddit screamed this at me and made me feel confused and ashamed of myself. But my wife saved me from the depths of self-doubt and redirected my energy to finding others like me who loved the idea of Red Dead characters being in queer relationships. And I found them. I ended up finding some of the most beautiful new artwork and short stories I've ever seen. There is no way these creators are fetishizing these characters. This led me to do some more research on why people ship characters in the first place. Dr. Lynn Zubernis, a licensed clinical psychologist who teaches at West Chester University, wrote the Psychology Today article, Rooting for Two Characters to Just Get Together Already. The article discussed, why are fans so emotionally invested in their favorite couples? Dr. Zubernis wrote, shipping can be a way to explore relationship dynamics that a person is interested in or finds desirable. It can be a healthy process to explore the sense of self. This idea resonated with me, and I started doing a lot of self-searching as to why I and so many others are fascinated with queer shipping characters in a video game about violent cowboys. I reached out to several artists and fans to discuss this fascination. I had a chat with the artist known as Celine on Instagram about their gorgeous and sensual artwork featuring the ship, Vander Matthews. I asked, before I found your art, I would have never considered Dutch and Hosea to be tragic lovers, but your art changed my mind. What is it about their relationship that inspired you to draw Dutch and Hosea in such a way? Celine said, their bond. They've known each other for so long and shared so many adventures. Hosea said Dutch and Bessie, his dead wife, changed him and made him a better man. He loved both, because he never missed the chance to speak about Dutch as he did about her. Plus, they made each other better, also because we know Hosea's death had hit Dutch. Then, the fishing mission, they are an old married couple for the whole mission. I'd like to add I like their friendship. Their little box of trust, the way Hosea touches Dutch's shoulder, and he starts to relax. You can see the stress release from his facial expression because this fucking game is so detailed. Basically, besides their outlaw reputation, they tried to survive together in a world that didn't need or want them. And this is the point. Besides the morality and choices, that's how they connected to me. I then asked, There has been a toxic aspect of the Red Dead Redemption 2 fandom that has been very homophobic and bigoted towards fans who imagine the characters in queer relationships. What is your response to people who may criticize you for shipping Dutch and Hosea? Celine said, I don't really care about negative comments. Honestly, they can be easily ignored simply because they may or may not change their view. But it's only about them, not me or anyone else. So to keep arguing is counterproductive in my opinion, because the brain needs months to accept and assimilate new things anyway, assuming that they're willing to do so. Next is from my chat with artist Cowboy Baby on Tumblr, and its work featuring Charther, or Charles and Arthur. I asked, I think your interpretation of Charther is the most unique I've seen. The boys are bearish and imperfect, but they look so wonderfully in love and happy with their entireties of each other. What is it about your art that you believe conveys that? Cowboy Baby said, Thank you. A big thing about my art is the inspirations I draw from. My biggest role model in art is from Tom of Finland. As a queer person, seeing queer happiness and queer eroticism is really important and honestly, just fun. That's what I'm trying to bring to my art. For Charles and Arthur, and the love I depict between them, the main thing is contrast. The game is grisly, and the characters' lives are walking tragedies. A moment of love in a life like that is more valuable than anything. A silver lining in the heaviest storm cloud imaginable. I try to bring this contrast or dichotomy between ugly/beautiful, rough/gentle, and unlovable/loved onto the canvas. I do my best to show the duality in these men's appearance and their actions, the posing and the colors. For example, the characters might be entwined in the open wilderness, contrast between close and far, or there might be a rough sketch framed by flowers, strong and delicate. Same thing repeats in lines and colors to emphasize the themes visually. I also bring a sense of fantasy to it as well. Arthur and Charles have terrible, bloody lives, but in my art, these people that many of us recognize ourselves and our queerness in them are allowed a moment of rest, or a kiss, or just holding hands. I feel like it's a fantasy not only for me as an artist or the viewers, but for the characters as well. I also talked with Petite Croc about their charming Maura Larney art on Tumblr. I asked, I find it unique how you portray Arthur and Josiah's relationship dynamics. Big, mean Arthur seems coy and allowed to be vulnerable when Josiah is interacting with him. One drawing I've seen has Josiah being a top to Arthur, and it's wonderfully intimate. So my question is, what is it about their interactions in the game inspired your perspective of their relationship dynamics? Petite Croc said, Thank you. Their interactions and missions have always been pleasant and fun for me. Josiah is such a charismatic and joyful character, but also a true mystery. I like how he's often seen around camp, trying to make people laugh with his magic tricks. And then you have Arthur, who's facing all these responsibilities. He has to be brave, protect the game, etc., but he has such a big heart. I just love these kinds of ship dynamics. But I think what inspired me the most was the mission where Arthur goes to rescue Josiah. Arthur losing patience at these guys who kidnapped him, but then seeing him be soft with Josiah, seeing him be beaten up and holding him gently. I don't know, that mission triggered something in me. And yeah, I like to think Josiah is a very caring partner, and Arthur would let him be vulnerable around him, that he would truly feel loved. I then asked, what is your response to people who may criticize you for shipping Arthur and Josiah? Petite Croc said, I try to ignore most of the hate I receive, even though it hurts to read it sometimes. I wish these people would take some time to reflect or educate themselves. Unfortunately for them, this won't make me stop drawing queer ships, for the simple reason that it makes me happy. Art is sort of a therapy for me, but I also know my drawings can have a positive impact on some people, so why should I stop? I just wish someday we won't have to face that kind of people and have to hide ourselves anymore. And finally, I chatted with Charlie Bird about their feisty art of shipping Bill Williamson and Alden Carruthers of the Rhodes train station. I asked, Bill and Alden seem so very different. Why do you like them as a ship? Charlie Bird said, Opposites can attract, and a lot of my ship types usually have some kind of differences. I guess I find it more fun to run with, but I also think that Bill and Alden have a surprising amount of similarities, even if it's mostly from their life experiences, especially if you go with the theory that they are both closeted gay men. In my AU, they are meant to help each other to figure themselves out a bit more. Bill being able to unwind and be comfortable with who he really is, and Alden being given the escape and freedom he needs to be happy. There's a fair bit of loneliness too, especially with Bill. They also have some dilemma of being disloyal to something, and my goal is for them to eventually be able to figure out what really matters, especially when their loyalty was never really respected in the first place. They both suffer from expectations of what they are meant to be, which is mainly just the era and toxic masculinity, but still, there are lots of characters who aren't suffering heavily from this. The way I see this ship is for it to be a healing relationship, where they help each other with their issues. I then asked, why do you think it's important to portray queer relationships in art? Charlie Bird said, it's always important to express yourself with art, especially when it comes to queer stuff. Main media doesn't do a good enough job, but even if it did, it's still important to create for yourself and even share experiences and ideas with others. But also it's meant to be something fun at the end of the day. If we're talking cowboy stuff specifically, I think it's even more important to make queer art, ships or otherwise. Society has whitewashed and straightwashed the cowboy era, and it's always a good reminder that cowboys don't actually belong to the straight white cis man. I want to give a shout out to two other artists. To Sim, who I featured in episode 3, Images of Great Predators. This artist's whimsical interpretations of Arthur and Albert Mason's ship, known as 2AM, has always been one of my favorites. Their style encapsulates the innocent, sweet nature of the 2AM ship that many of us are so fond of. And to Eva, who has done beautiful and empowering art for a romance between Sadie and Abigail. This artist is not afraid to acknowledge the fact that these women wouldn't have shaved their body hair, showing the erotic and natural beauty of their forms. I provided links to each of these artists' page in the description under this episode. Please check out their work. It's gorgeous stuff. I also got to discuss Red Dead shipping fan fiction with returning guests Tony and Nicola. Tony, tell me a little bit about what you like to look for.
As far as Red Dead goes, I mean, my personal favorite is Charles and Arthur, which luckily is pretty easy to find. I think the hardest part with fanfic is there's a lot of like one shots, and I mean, write whatever you want to write, and like you're the creator. But I usually try to look for like longer, like in-depth stories. I know that can be hard. I mean, I've been reading fanfic since there used to be fanfic on Quizzilla. I don't know if you remember that site, but I used to print out fanfics so I could take them on like camping trips so I could read.
Oh, that's cool.
I probably have been reading fanfic since like the late 2000s. I don't think AO3, if it was around, I didn't know about it. I knew about like fanfic, Quizzilla, and then occasionally you could find something good on DeviantArt. So, but yeah, usually tend to like ones that create a story within a already familiar world or a really good AU. So like as long as the characters aren't super OOC, you could throw them in whatever, like throw the Red Dead characters in Fallout, throw them into, Cyberpunk, whatever you want to do. But as long as the characters, like, it seems like the author themselves actually took the time to take the character into consideration and not just be like, me like these people, throw them in there. And then it's just like, I don't know, Sean's working at a desk job, like that does not feel him.
Nicola?
Very much like Tony, I am a hardcore Charther shipper. There's just something about Charles and Arthur as a ship. It's just, I don't know, it just feels right in a way. You ship who you want, and if you perceive Arthur as being straight, trans, whatever floats your boat. You're entitled to have your own personal opinions when it comes to ships, and you don't have to ship, the popular ships. I've seen quite a lot of more, is it underrated ships? You can kind of see like very minimal ships. There's obviously Arthur and Albert Mason. That's another ship that I could get on board because those two are just, their interactions are just adorable.
Yeah.
And Albert Mason is just adorable. And there's one that I see as well cropping up that I kind of find a bit odd, in my opinion, is Arthur and Kieran.
I've read that one a few times, and I can see
why they ship them together, but that's your thing. That's your thing. But yeah, Charther, forever in my heart.
And I think that when I first started playing, that was where my mind was going to originally too. Was Charles, because he just felt so different from the interactions were so different. But and I thought, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that would be who it is. But then of course my mind just went to Trelawney. But I can see that how people would love the Kieran ones, because it's like if you could expand more on that story. If they were given that chance, I can see that. I know that a lot of people really identify with Kieran, and I did read one recently. A friend of mine on AO3 wrote, and it turned out to be very sweet, and they're really careful, and they wrote. And this person wrote them in character really well. And so like, it wasn't just like they're like immediately attracted to him, blah, 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 and whoa, making out and stuff. It wasn't like that. And it made sense. Now I personally have a hard time when people ship Kieran with Bill. Because I think Bill's a bully, but I can see it. It's not my personal favorite to ship Arthur and Kieran. I find Kieran a little gross, but but in a very endearing, like a dirty puppy kind of way.
Come on, the man spent half the game tied to a post in camp.
Oh, I know. But I mean, you saw what character I'm like the most interested in, is the cleanest, like the oddball in the suit, So of course I'm, but I love Kieran. I do. I think he's a sweet character, and I can see that. I absolutely could see Kieran falling for Arthur, but
who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
I think they all
totally see it as like almost like a senpai notice me type ship.
Yeah. One of my favorite ones that I have read recently. I've read some really great one shots. Some really beautiful one shots, and they're just like sort of like one time only. Usually Arthur's a little bit confused about how he feels, and I get that. I find it interesting when people do have him be confused about his attraction to a same-sex character. I personally think that I don't think that he would be as confused about it in his mid-30s. I think that this would be something he would be more, just because of learning about the history of cowboys. I've come to realize that he probably would have been already very aware of it by this point. Is like,
probably knows, he just isn't, out announcing it.
Nah, he's fooled around. He's just not going to talk about it. I mean, especially if you're raised by Dutch and Hosea, I don't think that this is going to be
a curious couple, they say.
I need to read some Dutch and Hosea ones. I've been very hesitant to read anything with Dutch, because Dutch sets off a lot of triggering.
Well, and I think especially if you were to go with when they first met, I think it'd be a lot different, because even within the game, we get to see his decline. And I very much think that is triggered by Micah joining, which he only joined 6 months before the games take place, or the game itself takes place. So it would be very interesting to see, because I mean, they were like 21 or something like that when so they were practically kids raising another kid, like they aren't, it's not like a 40-year-old couple that's like, oh, we found this little gremlin in the woods, we're gonna raise him. Like,
I found, I think it was like a series, it was a Vander Matthews series where the first story is they find a baby Arthur near Coulter and they bring him back to camp, and it's, they're just raising this little foundling child. And like each like new story is like centered around this concept of what if Vander Matthews were raising a baby.
Aww.
And then some of the later stories just got really sad because, as we know what happens halfway through the game, certain plot points, and I remember thinking, no, this is just too sad. I can't.
I'd like to think that Dutch would be different if he had adopted Arthur when Arthur was much younger, but because Dutch is so similar to my mother, no, he wouldn't be much different. And I love the character of Dutch. I don't ever want to I'm not on the, oh, Dutch is an evil bastard. I mean, he becomes an evil bastard, but he wasn't always. And so I do love the idea of him having a romance with Hosea, and I can see how easy that would be for him and Hosea to have an early romance when they're young and just not famous yet, not in the public eye, not getting attention from girls, and then they're their bisexual selves, and it just being a casual thing, I think that would be, I think it makes sense. What do you look for, Nicola, when you're trying to find something to read for a Red Dead romance?
Something that isn't a copycat of something else that's been done. It can be hard. Writing's hard. So there might be like crossovers between other stories that you've read before. It's like, oh, this is similar to something that I've read before. But I like a little bit of smut. I like smut.
Yeah.
Even as an asexual, I like smut for some reason. That's weird.
Oh, you can.
But I love a slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
A slow burn. An angsty slow burn. And then when you get the payoff, it's just, it hits.
Mm-hmm.
It's something, and it's more fulfilling as a reader, like waiting for that moment. I mean, yeah, you could get that instant gratification with instant smut, with no overall plot line, if that's the thing that you want to read. But like a meaningful story that has decent smut and characters that aren't beige, cookie cutter trope types. I'm trying to avoid that writing my own. I don't know if I'm being successful. Still early days.
But it's okay to do tropes. It's just, how do you interpret the trope? Yeah.
Yeah. Something that stays true to the characters and it doesn't diverge completely away from what makes them them.
There tends to be an issue where some writers and artists want to make Charles very dominant. And I know that has been a big anger point for a lot of fans. Tony, I saw you gesturing. So
I was actually going to bring that up.
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot, especially with that ship.
Yeah.
A lot of people tend to make Charles like he's this like, I don't know, like super confident, super like, I don't want to say Charles is an introvert, but he is. But they make him almost like he's an extrovert. And even Arthur, I would say at best is an ambivert. Like he's not like trying to show off. But I've noticed in a lot of ship fics, like they'll get Arthur pretty good, but then they like just almost opposite of Charles. And I mean, not to say that I don't see him as the top, but I don't see it as in a pins to the wall. Like that is not him. Like it doesn't. Sean, sure. He gives me those vibes. It might be silly, but like
there's a few characters that have those vibes. Sadie has that vibe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He pegs whoever she's with.
Yeah. Unless it's Abigail. That could go either way.
Which
I mean, there's other things too. Like even the way that Charles ends up getting described doesn't even make sense. They always end up describing him as being physically larger than Arthur, and
people
even,
always draw him taller, like
yeah,
significantly taller. And I'm like, if you
he's
actually look in the game,
shorter.
he's shorter.
He's a shorter
He's
guy.
shorter. Like,
And the thing is, at best, Charles and Arthur are both these like really like, okay, we're kind of shy about stuff in our emotions. Writing them getting together wouldn't be just like a throwing somebody up against a wall. It would be a lot of just little subtle glances and little sweetened conversations, and then eventually they're like, "Oh, you like me? Yeah, I do." It would be like that. It would be super awkward and adorable. These two
they
big
give me
burly
the
men.
everybody else knows
Yeah.
that they like each other vibe, but
Yes.
they haven't said it or
Yeah.
acknowledged. It's very much the vibe of like, oh, I like him, but I can't tell him he won't like me, and they're both thinking that same thing.
Well, given how so self-deprecating Arthur is, he probably thinks, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of his
So
affections.
beautiful.
And Charles will no doubt have those same opinions going, oh,
Well, how's your hand, Charles?
I can't have this. It's just like, why? Just kiss, damn it.
It's so funny because we talk about them like they're just these little sweet babies, and
They are.
and they are little sweet babies who have happened to kill people. You could be both, and they definitely are, and they're just such well-written characters, and the chemistry. I think that's been the biggest part.
I just love the chemistry. That line that is later on in the game, the whole Charles, will you ride with me? Always. Ride or fucking die. I will die on that hill. Happily.
It's the reason I called my show Ride With Me. Yeah, it's like, even though my favorite ship is Shirley, I named the show after theirs because that is the, oh, he's not straight. Charles and him have way too much chemistry. But I think that's a big part of it. And I wonder if that, there's so much in the writing that leads us there. And I wonder, what are y'all's thoughts on how the writing and the acting in the game has led us so easily to want to ship, to want to write stories, to want to read more about their relationships?
I mean, just the in-depth relationships, and like all of them have this unique relationship in the game. They don't actually, it's not just like, hey, they're a group of friends and like that's it. Like every one of them has like this unique interaction. Like Sean kind of has that little brother vibe, but like, some people might still ship it. He is an adult, so go for it, and there is that dynamic too. And I mean, even Mr. Black and Mr. White, like all of these characters have this unique interaction, which essentially fills every need or want you might have from a ship dynamic. So you can kind of, whether someone likes it or not, like it gives you that opportunity to have all these different dynamics.
Each character just feels so natural. Like there's nothing stagey or performative about, the characters that you're seeing in the story that you're watching. There's a realism about it.
Yeah.
That you can kind of relate in terms of, obviously, the characters as individuals alongside the people that surround them, like their family, their friends. It doesn't feel fake. It feels genuine.
It really does.
You can tell that there's a genuine affection between not only the characters, but the actors that are playing them. And I love that.
Yeah, like they really did get time to spend together just talking before they were on stage. Yeah, and that chemistry, you do get a great sense of that there is especially with characters that Arthur knows before the game takes place. Like with Charles. You do get a sense that they have a already established respect for each other. And some kind of relationship. I mean, from the very beginning of the game, he talks so gently to Charles, and he talks to him like he does any of the women. And that's not like an insult to Charles. It just shows that there is a a way that Charles talks to Arthur, and Arthur responds to that very in the same way. I mean, he talks to everyone a little bit differently, but like the way he talks to characters like Javier and Bill and Sean, he talks to them around about the same way. He's like, "I'm big tough Arthur, and you need to listen to me," brr, brr, brr. Or Uncle on all them. But like his whole tone changes with Charles, and just like he does when he talks to Abigail or to Tilly. It's a whole different thing.
I think it's like like almost like a sign of respect, because like you look at a lot of the other men that Arthur talks to, and he's very much just kind of like either doesn't know if he can fully trust them, or like I'm not dealing with your bullshit. Whereas with Charles, he knows he doesn't really have to deal with that, and he has that like established trust. So, and I mean,
he's respectful, and
I think the only other male that probably has Arthur's level of respect would be Pearson. But I mean, like, he's the cook. It's kind of like you don't fuck with the cook.
Lenny is an interesting one, and I don't mean that as a ship. I mean that as the way they interact. It's very Arthur seems almost guarded, but respectful with Lenny, because Lenny's obviously different from any of the other punk kids who have entered the group, like Sean. But it's obviously very different. His care for him, the way I know everyone always joking about how Arthur's like, I don't give a shit about John. He got eaten by wolves. He's stupid ass for going out in the first place. Oh, Charles, your poor hand. It's great, and but even like I just love the pissy friendly way he talks to Trelawney. And that's different even from how he talks to the other guys in camp. And it's very much these two have a relationship of constantly messing with each other. But Arthur seems to have respect for Trelawney being smart. If he thinks he's obviously a snob, but he doesn't, like, when they're interacting about to plan for their stagecoach heist, that's his whole like, oh, I think you're as slippery as an eel, but you're still a man, and his little like eye roll thing, like he does. No, that whole business. It feels very flirtatious, but in a way like you do to when you have that friend in high school who could easily, you either want to like yell in their face or throw a book at them, or maybe accidentally make out with them. It's like that. Like, that if you're not careful, it could turn into a thing, but you also want to smack him around the head a little bit.
Yeah, Arthur definitely gets a lot more sassy around Trelawney.
I think because he knows they can play off each other. But that relationship definitely makes me think of the way they talk to each other is very reminiscent of the way my wife and I talk to each other. Or I love that dynamic where one person is like a bit snobby and a bit pissy, but like is like totally madly in love with the other person. You get it. There's touches of that in like Crowley and Aziraphale too, from Good Omens. And I love that dynamic, but so I want to make sure I don't just talk about Arthur.
I do enjoy the prim, proper, pretty boy with the grungy or dirty boy. I mean, even the gentleman pirate in Blackbeard. Like,
yes,
I do enjoy that ship or dynamic.
I love that dynamic, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what that dynamic is, because I feel like Trelawney and Arthur fall into that in some way.
I guess the overarching one would kind of be city boy versus like farm, or I guess, like pirate versus, aristocrat, like if we're going different eras or whatever.
See, I'm picturing given Trelawney's kind of stagey kind of persona. Trelawney is the theater kid.
Yeah.
And Arthur is the kid that gets roped into doing tech.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of people would be like, huh, that I would loop Arthur in the same place as Aziraphale or Steed. Because it's like, no, they're very, no, you got tough guy, and then you got those two. But like in the sense of they're sort of like innocents in some ways. Arthur is an innocent is a weird thing to me. But like he is in some ways. He doesn't like to talk to people. He's a little bit awkward, and you got like uh uh Crowley and Blackbeard and Trelawney. They're very stagey, like you said. They're theater kids. They're the ones everyone's looking at, and they do the trickery.
Oh, and I mean, Trelawney also has like all these kind of. He's just like, I can do it. I can get it. Like, and then Arthur's just like,
oh,
there's a man using lightning to build a robot truck. Like, he's just like, what?
it's crazy. So one of my favorite ships that I've been seeing lately in artwork and stuff is Seda Gale. And I've not read anything yet, and I want to. And I love it because when I see people post about Seda Gale fan fiction and artwork, there's always somebody in the comments that go, "No, Abigail is supposed to be with John." And the comment from the writer, the author, I mean the author or the artist is always like, "Oh no, she still is with John. She's just also with Sadie." And it's like, it's a Sadie. I mean, she's just gonna be there. She's already there. It's Sadie. And like some person was like asking one of these people, like, where would John sleep? I mean, where's Abigail sleeping? I'm sorry, where's Sadie sleeping while she's dealing with her knife wound? Where is she?
John sleeps in the middle because he's the bottom, clearly.
Yeah, or at the foot of the bed. He's curled up at the foot of the bed. Yeah. I don't think Abigail would I feel like she's a spread out sleeper. I've seen some pretty good stuff with Bill and Alden, of all people. And I'm a little on the fence about that one sometimes because some people who do that, I think it's lazy, because it's like, oh, you pick the two queer joke characters from the game and put them together. But then some people are really actually putting them together in a true sense of like, what if Bill was to have met Alden while in the game? Would that have changed him in some way? If they got on well together, would that have kept Bill from becoming a total shit person that he becomes? And like, well, what if they stayed on together and they're like run off together to be outlaws?
I know people ship Lenny and Sean together.
That one's
I've not read anything with them.
I feel like they're just like little buddies.
But I've been reading one between Hosea and Bessie. I know it's a straight ship.
Oh, that's okay.
But
well, I mean, it's
the same.
Yeah.
It's introducing a character that we never meet in the game, and obviously each time you read a Hosea Bessie ship story, each writer is going to have their own different interpretation on who Bessie is as a character.
Exactly.
There's one, it's not, I think it's a Charther story, I think. But I think they kind of inspire their interpretation on Bessie, on Dolly Parton.
I love that.
Listen, but the one that I'm reading at the moment, chronicling the game as we know it from Bessie's perspective, if she was still alive.
Yeah.
It's like, that's interesting. That's something different.
I'm glad you mentioned Bessie because there's been a lot of like, well, if Dutch and Hosea were such a thing, then how is Bessie the love of his life? How can that be both a thing? And I've seen some people talk about that, and they've written about it, they've drawn about it, about how, Dutch and Hosea could have been an item early on, but Dutch being Dutch, he's not going to commit to anyone. And then Bessie comes into it, and then that's who is his love. And there's a couple things there. Does Bessie know they have a history? I think she would. I think she would have known. I don't think she would have really thought too much bad of it. I mean, she does fall in love with and marry a a criminal. So, so like she knows. I mean, Mary knows a lot of what's been going on in Arthur's life, and she chooses not to get into it. And Bessie did. But there's been some cute drawings by some artists. I think after Bessie and Hosea get married, and it's like welcome to the family, and she's sharing a bed. It's showing her laying cuddled up next to Hosea on her side of the bed, and they're snuggled up next to each other, and they're like trying to make sure each other has enough room, and then they pan back, and like you got Arthur sprawled out on the foot of the bed, like because he's an overgrown teenager at this point. You got Dutch next to Hosea asleep, and like little kid John sprawled out on top of them, and it's like, yep, that vibes, that makes sense.
I mean,
And it was
polyamory is a thing. It was a thing in the Old West, but
yeah, it was. And I think especially in just groups of people just trying to survive, and I mean, poly is not something for me personally, but I can understand it. I do understand it, and I love this drawing because it's so innocent, despite because it just looks like every other picture of kids laying across their parents when they're asleep, and it's just like, and she's like in the photo, she's like, I'm fine with this, and I think it's real sweet, and then you get into that whole like, well, if Hosea ends up with Bessie, ultimately ends up with Bessie, is that a straight relationship?
It's his wife, and then Dutch is the boyfriend. There you go.
Yeah, but like even if Dutch is like out of it and at this point focused on Annabelle and his whole like, oh no, I'm a big cool outlaw, pew pew, I'm Dutch Vanderlyn, everyone knows who I am. I don't sleep with dudes, because I feel like that's what happened.
Dutch gives those vibes.
Yeah,
Dutch is a side chick.
But it's like, does that make it a straight relationship? And again, that just depends on how you write Hosea. Because I think that in fan fiction there is lots of room for having a bisexual character. Like you can make Arthur a bisexual character who falls in love with a female character, and that's fine. Or a female character who might be bisexual who falls in love with a man in the game, and that's fine too, because it's still, it doesn't take away their queerness, and I think that's a good point. Like, if we're talking about queer shipping, I want to make sure that people don't invalidate queer writers who write seemingly straight ships, because that's not necessarily, that's not everyone's reality. So if you're out here listening, you're a queer reader, give them a chance. If you see something that says they're queer but they're still with a woman, if Arthur's queer but he's still with a woman, give it a chance. It could be good, because it could speak to a bisexual experience or a pan experience. Because as we know, queer relationships, even if you end up with someone who is the opposite sex of you, or the opposite gender from you, there's still that, as long as your partner is accepting of that part of yourself, of that part of your history, then you're still in a queer relationship, because you're acknowledging that. Because I think, like I have friends who are bisexual, who are, and she's married to a straight man, but she is bisexual. She knows that her husband knows that she still finds women attractive. Does that make their relationship any less? No, they love each other. But it's still a part of, that dynamic. And I think that that's an interesting dynamic to also include in writing, for fiction. Nicola, I know you're writing, some fan fiction.
Yes.
I've been enjoying it. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm currently in the middle of writing chapter 5. Writing down the first few paragraphs is always a struggle and a half, trying to get the words out. But my story is, I'm planning it in my head as being a series.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that I'm currently writing is part 1. And it is about a sex worker called Eleanor Todd, who at 17 years old meets Arthur Morgan at some grimy little brothel in a town called Grimstone. I know, how very original. I literally had to go on Google to Google up old timey Western names because I had no creative inhibitions that day.
Look, if Tombstone and Deadwood exist, you could go with Brimstone.
Yeah, it sounded cool. So, yeah, that sounds like an old West town. I have some story elements that I'm keeping to myself.
Yeah.
And that'll play much later on in the story.
Yeah.
I do want to inject some kind of like foreshadowing kind of things that might allude to a certain thing, but I'm not going to say anything. Again, I'm being very vague with this comment here.
No spoilers.
Yes, spoilers. That only I know. But yeah, it might be a straight relationship that I'm writing. It would be cruel to. I'd be lying to say it wasn't an excuse for me to write some smut. Because yeah, it is. Again, hi, I'm asexual, but it's not a self-insert because Eleanor Todd is a much cooler. I say cooler. I think she's a much more interesting individual than I am, even though she's a creation of my own head.
You'd be surprised though, a lot of like ace people are into like some crazy fictional stuff. I think most of the people, whether it's them commissioning art or artists themselves that do like the really extremely kinky stuff, almost all of them that I know are ace. And I'm just like, yep.
And that's not surprising, honestly, because I've been since I've started doing this podcast, I've been doing so much research on queerness and all, the wide rainbow of what queerness is and how queer people express this part of themselves. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ace people who do really insanely gorgeous writing or artwork that are very kinky. And I've noticed that these people tend to be the ones who work the best in the emotional aspect of the kink. Because a lot of people tend to think that, and look, soulless smut is beautiful. I love soulless smut. Sometimes you just want to read people fucking, and that's fine. That's fine. But a lot of times when we're trying to like just kind of deal with things emotionally, we like having a little bit of story, like, oh, why are they fucking? What are they feeling in this moment? What led them to this? Why are they doing this specific kind of sex move? There's a reason emotionally for all of this. And I think that's where, a perspective as someone who is ace or not, or someone who maybe leans towards being ace, can shine in, because there's so much more to, there's so much beauty about the emotional aspect of attraction and about love and why people come together in a physical sense. And sometimes just the emotional part of it is great. I think that they tend to be much better writers at the whole, all of the stuff that happens right before the full on sex part, like the build up, the slow burn. Because there is that emotional aspect, and that makes, I think that there's been a lot of good, poignant artwork and writing that has existed because of that. So yeah.
Because I know with my story, even though at the beginning it starts off very hot and heavy, I do intend it to be a slow burn.
Yeah.
As best as I can. Again, I have a lot of doubts about my own writing ability, but I did inject a character in the last chapter that had somebody comment, oh, does that mean that said individual is going to turn up again? Spoilers. I injected Mary Litton's father.
Yeah.
I injected him into the story. And the comment was, oh, well, if he's there, when's Mary going to show up? How is she going to react to stuff that's happened? It's like, all will be told. Oh,
And I
so
am
eventually.
enjoying your story. I really am. I love how you're writing your main character. She's very interesting. Um, it's fun inserting characters like you said. When you're writing, it's fun to see how they're going to interact and play into like the Mary situation. And I like I know a lot of queer writers and artists. I don't like Mary. I hate her, but I also I understand her more than I used to. But like I'm not nice to her. I'm
I
trying.
think I think she's necessary for
Oh, very
Arthur's growth.
necessary.
Like, I'm not the biggest fan of her either, especially because she's very much like, oh, like I'll do things to convince him to change, and it's like that's not the way to get someone to change for the better. Like that's not how you go about it.
They're not good for each other, but they love each other.
She's a bit too judgmental.
But I mean, she is. But I'm also trying to like understand. I've really tried to do a lot of thinking about it because when I was working on my fan fiction, I was trying to like work in how his hyperfixation with wanting her love despite how wishy-washy she is, what that's like to someone. I have a few friends who are kind of like Arthur in that sense, who they just, no matter how they're treated by that person, that person could drop everything and would drop everything and go back to that person on a dime because they've just got a hold on them. And so I was trying to like figure out like why is it that Mary has such a hold on Arthur, because I'm not the kind of person who does that. Like when I would get broken up with, I'd be like, I'm done with you. No, don't talk to me. Like 5 years later, one of them was like trying to talk to me again. I'm like, no, I don't care if I was madly in love with you. Then just no, I'm not doing this. So it was hard for me to understand how Arthur could be so hung up on her. I just thought that, oh, she must have been like really, really, really tore him apart. But then I started like really thinking about it, and she has a very similar kind of background and in a lot of sense to him. She's got a very controlling, manipulative father, and there's never enough money. Dad's always doing something shady, and she only puts up with her dad because she stays to protect her brother. And that's pretty much what Arthur does. He puts up with Dutch and all of Dutch's stupid shit that gets them in trouble, and excuses a lot of behaviors because she wants to be there and protect, Jamie. And so like I get it, they're very much the same person. And that might be why they care for each other so much, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And can't be, not necessarily the same people can be in love, because there has to be a give and a take. And like she had to love Arthur more than her dedication to her father, and vice versa, for that to have worked. And like that's something I've worked into my story, where like I have Josiah knowing fully well he is not going to get Arthur to ever see Dutch as anything other than, his father is a shining light of hope in his life. And I mean, he's going to be there to support him and to help him and to try to be there and, all this kind of stuff. But like, you got to work with that. You got to work with people who are so emotionally manipulated by their parents. I mean, those people need love too. And I think I do that because I see that a lot in myself with Arthur, and my wife has put up with so much with my family, and that she chooses me despite that. And so, I understand Mary a little bit more than I used to. I still don't like it, but anyway, stuff. Okay, what is your biggest pet peeve in Red Dead fan fiction shipping, besides poor Charles constantly being seen as a big brute, which is just total bullshit, racist bullshit? I think we all agree on don't ship John and Arthur. Please stop. Like I understand that people
Arthur and Micah just
Honestly, the only thing worth shipping Micah with is a trash compactor.
Oh man.
I mean, I don't know. Like, this is just my opinion, but I find something kind of icky about Arthur and Sadie being paired up.
Yes.
I
Same person.
I think it's because I perceive them to be more of like it's like a brother sister kind of vibe,
Yeah.
like a purely platonic thing. And
It almost feels like Arthur finally found, because like John, he always gives the like, this is a little brother. I gotta watch out
Yeah.
for him. He's an idiot, you know, like
Yeah.
he always needs help. Whereas Sadie, it's almost like finally having someone who is on par with him.
Yeah.
You know, like he is able to, he doesn't need to worry about her. He doesn't need to, you know, do it's just, yeah, I will agree with you though. It does feel a little weird to like ship them.
I feel like
I mean, I don't want to judge the fans that do ship Arthur Sadie. You know, you do you. But it's just almost if they saw two hot people and said they must be together.
These are the two coolest of the girl and the guy. We must put them together. It happens a lot.
Closest in age. She's
a lot of
closest in age
fandoms.
to Arthur. So
Yeah. There's a lot of that happens with like fandoms I've noticed.
I feel like if you're gonna do it, make it work. Really, really commit to it. You have to convince me. And I mean, I feel like she's very representative of probably the way Arthur was after Isaac and Eliza died. Because she's so raw in it. And I can imagine that's how he was. He probably was unhinged, since we know that originally Arthur was going to be written as Isaac being a baby and having died on their way to Coulter from freezing to death. There are game files of not Roger reading it, but like somebody doing a stand-in reading for it, where they were doing like testing of lines. And he is much, much harsher, much more like Sadie. And during like those opening scenes and throughout. And so I feel like they probably worked that into more Sadie's character. So it makes me imagine that's how Arthur probably was. And but yeah, they're just basically the same person. And I cannot see Arthur being her type of dude anyway. Like, I mean, I've not played online, but I've watched the clips of Jakey, of her husband. And he seems like this very like nice, chill, even tempered guy. Have y'all ever watched those clips of Jakey? He's just like, and she's all like, "What are you doing in my house?" basically. And he's like, "It's okay, it's all right, we're good, we're chill." So it's like, I can't imagine her going after somebody else who is just as hot-headed as her. Like, she needs someone who can like make her like cool her down, basically.
Well, it's honestly
yeah,
one of the coolest things I've found out about playing online is you do get to see these little glimpses of the characters from the story, like Sean, Trelawney.
yeah.
You know, you actually get to see, because I think online's kind of takes place before the main game story, because
it takes place like earlier that year or something like that.
Yeah, like before the Blackwater event. So like it's interesting to get to see some of those and learn a little bit more about the characters. Now I haven't met everybody yet, but
I've watched the clips. And they're fun because I love, of course, watching the Trelawney ones. I did play online long enough to mess with Trelawney. I literally got on, logged on, and I just, as soon as I was able to, I crossed that map and I immediately started messing with them. And so like, I got to where he wouldn't talk to me for a while. Of course, I mean, it's me. But yeah, I think that's, I like that that's there, because it does, for me, it gives me evidence that shows what kind of a man she's into. And it helps me, it helps support my view of her being bi or pan leaning, you know, or you know, that her preferred type has nothing to do with being
Softer.
a man or a woman. She likes someone who softens her. Yeah, or who is a rational thinker, because even Abigail is a rational thinker who softens John, even though she does it in her I will knock you about the head kind of way, which I love. I know people hate Abigail for that.
This is for your own good, bitch.
Stop being mean to Abigail, people. We love Abigail in this place. One of my favorite fan fictions I've ever read, I found, was because I was looking for an Arthur Trelawney one, and this was a long one. And like Tony said, you like finding long ones. I love ones I can read for a long time. I was sad that this one got abandoned because it got abandoned like at an extremely pivotal point in the story, and it sucked me in. And it had some romantic elements that I'm not used to reading, to do with like alpha stuff, and I wasn't used to that. And I'm still personally on the fence about that style, and I don't mean to say that in a way to insult anyone, because it's just me. But I loved this, and it was really interesting because it was a really interesting dynamic between Arthur and Josiah, but also Arthur and Dutch. And I was, at first, when I realized I got sucked into the Arthur Josiah thing, but then when they started working in Arthur having some really interesting sexual tension with Dutch, I was a little weirded out by that, because again, my relationship with my mother feels very similar to Dutch and Arthur's. And I was like, this is really kind of buggy. But the way they wrote this, it wasn't a purely sexually driven kind of thing. It was a power dynamic thing that Dutch was sort of taking advantage of, but it wasn't like done in a taboo kind of weird kind of way. But there was definitely, Arthur was in love with Dutch in this story, but he was also in love with Trelawney. But, and again, I don't normally go for the Arthur Dutch thing, but I got it. I understood what they were going for, because this was a situation where Arthur came into the group when he was what, 12, no, a little bit older than that, right?
He was 13.
Yeah. And so, like, even though this was someone who raised him, he was at the age where people start discovering, most people, not everyone, but most people start discovering themselves sexually. And Dutch was a very young man when he came into the group. So I can absolutely see that being like the way that a younger person might fall in love with a teacher. And I know I don't go for that kind of dynamic, but in the sense of storytelling, I thought it was really interesting, because it does happen where younger people do grow up being quietly in love with someone who is older than them, who and even if there was nothing between them in the story, nothing had actually happened until like something did end up happening. But this takes place after chapter 6, if Arthur had lived and he was like mid-honor. It's a very well written story, and the dynamic was very, I was like, at first I was like, no, I'm not gonna read this, but then I was like, oh man, this is really good. So I think that, again, if you're going to go with a shipping characters that a lot of people kind of like cringe about, if you're gonna do it right, and it can be some really great writing. So like I hesitate. I know it's easy for me to want to go, ew, people shipping John and Arthur together, people shipping these two characters together. It's gross, but I don't want to go so far as to fully shame anybody, because there might be something that they're connecting with in the writing that they have found, and it speaks to something. And yeah, there are other medias that have done similar things to this, and no one seems to have a problem with. Have any of y'all watched She-Ra at all?
Mm-hmm. Which two characters?
She-Ra and Catra, or Adora.
Okay. Yeah.
They're raised together, but they end up romantically together, and so people don't really seem to have a problem with that. So I can kind of understand why then people wouldn't necessarily have as a hard time seeing John and Arthur together. And me personally, I can't do it. But I can see that this also, when it comes to like Dutch and Arthur, it's still like ew, but this happens a lot with straight parents in romances. It's happened for a long time. Younger female character, older male character. One of my favorite stories is Sense and Sensibility by, Jane Austen, and there is a pairing like that in it. So it's like I don't want to insult or try to like me personally try to like make anyone feel bad for liking certain kinds of ships, because I mean, again, it's all about perspective.
Yeah.
I know for me, Vanda Morgan is a bit of a guilty pleasure. It depends purely on the context. I remember reading one, and it's a really good one. I forget the name. It was a while ago when I read it, but it's Dutch/Arthur, and I think Arthur is meant to be 21 in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But it primarily centers around not just Vanda Morgan, but Dutch and Colm O'Driscoll's brother.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a love triangle kind of thing.
Putting things into context, in the stories, like, it depends on what you're doing with it. Are you having Dutch be attracted to a very, very young Arthur? That's a problem. But having Arthur be attracted as a 13-year-old to a 20-something-year-old Dutch, but then Dutch not like noticing him until he was an adult, that's different. Again, it's not my personal thing. I don't personally go for that, but because I'm really close to a lot of my much younger cousins. So for me, that's like that's my own perspective. But again, it is a trope that we see over and over again in straight romances from way far back. And so it's like people love the movie Memoirs of a Geisha, but that's the same idea. The guy in it that she's in love with has known her off and on since she was a very small child, and you end up wanting them to be together by the end of the story when she's much older, in her 30s.
It's fiction.
It depends on how you're writing. Are you fetishizing? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you are not painting the story for what it really is, if you are not putting in these issues, if you're not doing this realistically, then you're fetishizing it. And and do this right. Do these issues the right way if you're going to write it. Don't do it lazily. And I think that's such an important thing about writing. If you're going to write fan fiction, take it seriously. And I'm not saying be the best writer. That has nothing to do with it. Being the most beautiful, being able to write beautifully has nothing to do with writing something well. Because some of the most simplistic writers have written amazing things. And, if you're going to do it, commit to it. And if you want to write smut. Acknowledge that it's smut. If someone calls you out on it, just say, hey, say what it is.
PWP.
Say what it is. This is what you want. You want instant gratification. Read the story.
It worked for 50 Shades.
Yes. So. Acknowledge it. Know what you are. Accept it.
I was saying that 50 Shades was good. No, it was god bloody awful.
Shipping has been around as long as storytelling. Think about all the affairs from Greek mythology. And it's definitely not a new concept to various fandoms. Fanfic and art for shipping has been a common occurrence for Kirk and Spock since Star Trek's original run in the 1960s. So ship who you want. As long as it doesn't fetishize pairings that can be potentially harmful to people, go for it. But also, ship and let ship. There is so much real and terrible things going on in our lives and in the world to worry about than disagreeing about ships. Dr. Zaburnus wrote, curate your own experience by deciding what you want to read, what you want to watch, and who you want to associate with in fandom. Find your people and celebrate what you love with them. Find your people. But I also encourage all of you to try to express your favorite ships. Write, draw, create music lists or mod stuff on PC that allows you to celebrate your headcanons. It doesn't matter how bad or good anyone else may think the end results are. Ultimately, this is for you, and the version of these characters belong to you. I want to thank Petite Croc, Charlie Bird, Celine, and Cowboy Baby for sharing their artwork, and to Nicola and Tony for being on the show. In the next and final episode, I will be discussing the queerness of Arthur Morgan. I will feature a written interview that I did with Roger Clark himself, as well as responses from a wide variety of fans concerning how important Arthur is to helping them better accept, understand, and celebrate their queerness. As always, outlaws for life, and be gay, do crimes.